Parents chose my sister's housewarming party over my wedding because I refused to invite her after she punched me. Now, my grandparents are walking me down the aisle instead. For a very long time, I have always known that my parents loved my older sister, Vicky, more than me. She was the planned child while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me but decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was even born, but my dad's parents were very much alive, so they took on a significant role in my upbringing. Grandma and grandpa were the constants in my life, providing the love and support that I often felt lacking from my own parents. I remember so many instances when my parents would leave me behind with my grandparents and only take my sister for trips. When I was young, I didn't mind because it was fun living with my grandparents, but as I started to grow up, like when I was 6 or 7 years old, I realized just how unfair this was. But my problem wasn't just with my parents. It was also with my sister Vicky. While I harbored no ill will toward Vicky, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted addition to the family. She knew that as well and made me feel like a stranger every day in my own home. She would always compete with me for everything, be it about grades, attention from our parents, or even the smallest accomplishments. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing end because my parents preferred her always. As a result, I would feel really inferior and we never quite saw eye to eye. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual contest, with her consistently coming out on top. On one occasion, she wanted to be friends with a group of girls, but because she was nerdy she was afraid to approach them. One of the girls and I had art classes today, so she introduced me to the rest of the group and we all would hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of this that she made my parents talk to me about including her also whenever I was hanging out with them. I tried to fight, but my mother called me selfish while my dad said she was my sister and I should look after her. Begrudgingly I agreed and introduced Vicky to the rest of the girls. Now Vicky doesn't really have a lot of friends, so she can come off as over-enthusiastic, so she would constantly try to impress the girls in our group, often coming across as intrusive. Despite her efforts, she struggled to find her place among them, and the awkward tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For example, one of the girls had a crush on a guy, so Vicky took it upon herself to approach the guy and let him know that the girl liked him. He laughed because he was not interested and went and told everyone about it, which embarrassed the girl. After this, the girls told me very firmly that they didn't want me to bring Vicky with me to our hangouts, so I agreed. However, Vicky wasn't having it. She threw a tantrum when she found out that the girls wanted nothing to do with her and went to our parents insisting that I should not hang out with these mean girls either, since I was her sister and I should stand up for her. I refused and told her that it was her own fault that they didn't want to be friends with her, but my parents as usual supported her. They lectured me about how Vicky had no ill intentions and that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky, but that if they didn't then I should cut them off also. I refused and put my foot down. I liked hanging out with them, and unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to jeopardize my friendship in any way. I told my parents that I had enough and it wasn't up to me to find friends for Vicky. My parents were pissed and gave me the silent treatment for weeks, but I'm glad I stuck to my guns. This group of girls has continued to be my friends till today and are basically like my sisters. I have cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most meaningful moments of my life. However, at that time, it was really hard for me to stand firm in my decision. There were moments when doubt crept in, when I questioned whether I had made the right choice in prioritizing my own happiness over what they wanted. This was not the only reason Vicky grew to hate me. There was also another incident of a boy. She had a crush on a guy and I had no idea about him. He and I would sit together for some classes because we were friends. He tried to ask me out for junior prom, but I declined politely since I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a hue and cry about it, telling my parents how I always take things she wants and that I was knowingly flirting with the guy for months. She called me a bunch of nasty words which no one should say to their own sister, and told my parents how she wished I was not her sister. My mother sided with her, telling me how it was wrong of me and that as a sister I should respect girls' code. I tried telling them that I wasn't even interested in the guy and had declined his invitation, so she was free to ask him if she wanted, but Vicky refused to let it go. Looking back, I think she knew the guy would have rejected her anyway, so she just wanted to take her frustration out on me since he asked me instead of her. Once my dad took me out for ice cream, telling me that he wanted to spend some father-daughter time with me. Now this never happened, so I was really pleased. However, he started asking me a bunch of questions like if me and my boyfriend were being careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if my boyfriend and I ever did drugs. I was taken aback by his line of questioning and asked him what he meant by all this. This is when my dad revealed that Vicky had been making up stories and telling my parents for months that I was doing drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone for him to verify that Vicky was lying. Later, when my dad confronted her about all the lies, she tried to justify that no one our age just hangs out with a guy and that I was hiding things from everyone. I was so pissed that I yelled at her for trying to make unnecessary drama and told her that it wasn't my fault that she had no one to date, but that she needed to keep her nose out of my business. Vicky didn't like it and punched me. This happened out of nowhere since he had never been physically violent before. My nose started bleeding as I fell down on the ground, clutching my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the emergency room, and all the while they were pleading with me to not file a police complaint against Vicky. They kept saying how it would ruin her life while I was sitting in the backseat clutching my face. Vicky didn't even care, nor did she apologize. Later, when the nurse asked me about the incident, I told her the truth and she called CPS. My parents were furious with me for involving CPS, viewing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were dismissed as a mere accident, an isolated incident that should not warrant such drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky was not a danger to me and that her actions were out of character. In the end, Vicky was let go, but they warned my parents that they would keep a close eye on our situation in case any other accidents happened with me. As you can imagine, Vicky was really shaken up, and so were my parents. Later, my parents told me that they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mother started to cry and told me how I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders. My father's disappointment was palpable, his words heavy with reproach as he questioned my decision to escalate the situation. I told them firmly that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I did feel guilty involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safer at my own house once Vicky had been formally warned. My parents had a separate conversation with her, and since that day, she stopped talking to me altogether. I very much preferred this over her constantly hovering around me or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents found out about this incident, they asked me to pack my bags so I could live with them for the remainder of high school. They informed my parents, who did not protest much, so I left to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' place, I felt safe and loved here. The remaining days of high school went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never once visited me or called me throughout all that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them, even though it hurt me that they could so easily discard me like I was nothing. When I was graduating high school, my parents only showed up to cheer for Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me, and it felt like I was just a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for being so blatantly obvious about their favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather told them, but my dad later approached me awkwardly and congratulated me. Later, I found out that I was accepted into a good college with a full scholarship. I was so happy about it because I was dreading asking my parents for any financial help. I informed my grandparents about this, and they offered to take me out to a nice restaurant for dinner. After dinner, my grandmother posted pictures of me on her Facebook account, writing a long caption about how proud she was of me for being such an exceptional student. Our relatives soon found out about it, and they chimed in congratulating me. I guess some of them might have reached out to my parents, who had no idea about all this. Instead of feeling happy about it, my mother called to tell me the next day that Vicky had locked herself in her room, crying, because she had not been accepted yet by any college, and that I was knowingly trying to make my sister feel bad about her grades by talking to all our relatives. She told me how this was all my fault because Vicky was apparently depressed after the CPS incident, and I had pushed her into bad grades. I was so unbelievably heartbroken that my own mother could blame me for such a thing that it was the last time I ever talked with her for a very long time. My grandparents helped me move into my college dorm. Due to my high school boyfriend's college being far away from me, we had broken up, so I went into college single and ready to embrace the next chapter of my life with newfound independence and determination. The breakup had been difficult, but I was excited to meet new people. This is where I met Rob. He and I were both freshmen, and we both spent half of our days in the library. Rob was unlike anyone I had ever met before. His quiet demeanor and studious nature mirrored my own, and we quickly found common ground in our shared love for academia. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, and I realized that I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond mere friendship. Being an extrovert, I was quite upfront about my feelings for Rob, and I was surprised to know that he felt the same way. We started going out and have been going 8 years strong. My grandparents have met Rob and they absolutely adore him. I have met Rob's parents, who literally treat me like their own daughter. On occasions, Rob's mother has even confessed to me how she had always wanted a daughter, so she is glad that Rob met a wonderful person like me. To be honest, this is the first time I have been surrounded by family members who like me and don't actually resent me. I have told Rob stories of my childhood growing up, and he listens to me with empathy and understanding. Throughout these last 8 years, my parents have hardly contacted me except to send me an occasional birthday text if they remembered, but that is it. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me while we were trekking to our unusual spot to watch the sunrise, and it was a dreamy proposal. It was so sweet how nervous he was to pop the question to me, and I had no doubts in my mind when I accepted the proposal. I posted pictures of my engagement on my Instagram and also informed my grandparents about this. They were so happy for me and congratulated us on our future. I guess the news must have spread because my parents called me out of the blue to congratulate me as well. I thought it was just a casual conversation since we had not talked for years. They asked me about my life, my job, and my apartment before my dad asked straightforwardly if he could walk me down the aisle. I was taken aback by his sudden question, since just a few moments ago, he didn't even have an idea about which company I worked in. I told him that I had not thought about it yet, and my dad told me how it would be embarrassing if I didn't ask him and others would question us about it, so it's better if he walked me down the aisle. I scoffed and told my parents that I didn't even know if I was going to be inviting them to my wedding since we had not been in contact, but this pissed my parents. My mother started to tell me how disappointed she was by my response, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She went on to tell me how they would always be my parents no matter what and that I should let bygones be bygones. Part of me was tempted to listen to my parents and accept my dad's offer because I did want our relationship to be mended, but another part of me hesitated, wary of opening myself up to potential disappointment and hurt again. However, I was going to be entering a new chapter of my life in a few months, so I told my dad that he could walk me down the aisle and he seemed overjoyed. Now during the wedding planning, I reached out to my high school girlfriends who I had always stayed in touch with despite the physical distance that had grown between us due to our careers. I told them how I wanted the gang back together and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were a lot of happy tears and congratulations, and without hesitation, they accepted my invitation to be part of my bridal party, embracing the opportunity to reunite and celebrate this milestone in our lives together. We all planned to go to Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party, while Rob had a separate bachelorette party with his friends as well. My friends and I posted a bunch of pictures from the party, and overall everyone had a lot of fun. However, when I came back home, my parents called me to let me know how disappointed they were that I had not invited Vicky to be a part of the celebration. I told them that there was no way that I would have involved Vicky in my bachelorette party and that I didn't want her to be a part of my life. This took my parents by surprise and they asked me what I meant, so I clarified that Vicky's actions, particularly her history of deceit and betrayal, had left me deeply wounded and mistrustful of her intentions. I couldn't fathom inviting her to such an intimate and joyous occasion as my bachelorette party, knowing that her presence would only cast a shadow over the festivities. I also informed my parents that this was also why she was not invited to my wedding. Hearing this, my parents lost it. They went off about how I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding and how it was my duty as her sister to include her in such important events. They told me that Vicky had been looking forward to meeting me after she found out that I was getting married. I was confused and I asked my parents what gave her that idea, since we had not even talked to each other for such a very long time, but my parents brushed my concern aside, saying this is not how sisters behaved with each other. I understand where you're coming from, I told them. But you have to understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated. After everything that's happened, I just don't feel comfortable having her be a part of my wedding. She has not even once apologized to me for everything she put me through. However, my parents as usual ignored my words. My mother kept saying how she wanted what was best for the family and that inviting Vicky wasn't a big deal anyway. My dad insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't invited and this would cast a negative light on my wedding. However, I knew better than to yield to their demands, so I did not relent to them. I told them that I was okay with people talking behind my back and questioning my character as long as I was surrounded by people I liked and trusted during my wedding. My mother then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this and went on to tell me how my in-laws were going to judge me for being so unbelievably cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and informed my parents that my fiancé and in-laws knew about my family dynamics and none of them would even care if Vicky was present or not. They urged me to reconsider, emphasizing the importance of family unity and forgiveness. But I remained steadfast in my resolve, unwilling to compromise my own sense of well-being for the sake of appeasing others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us holding on to our own perspectives, and my parents told me how they needed to think things over, and we ended our conversation there. I did inform my grandparents about this as I felt a bit guilty for standing up to my parents, and they completely have my back. My grandparents told me that I should not force myself to invite anyone I didn't want there and that my parents were as usual trying to guilt trip me. Since this conversation, I have been feeling a bit better about my decision and got distracted with my wedding planning since my wedding is fast approaching. Last week my dad called me to let me know that he had thought long and hard and that he and mom would no longer be attending the wedding. Before I could even react, he went on to say that this also meant that he would not be walking me down the aisle. I asked him if there was a specific reason why, and he informed me that Vicky was going to be moving to a new place soon, which my parents had helped her find, and since I was going to be excluding her from the wedding, she had decided to host a housewarming party that same day so they would be attending that instead of my wedding. I felt a mix of shock and disbelief wash over me as I processed my father's words. The realization that my own sister's housewarming party took precedence over my wedding was a bitter pill to swallow, exacerbating the sense of hurt and betrayal that I had always felt for years. I simply told him that I understood and I hung up the call. Although I tried to act brave in front of my dad, deep down, the pain of rejection cut deeper than words could express. When I informed Rob, he was furious about how insensitive my parents could be after they were the ones who had insisted on being invited. He was the one who gave me the idea that I should ask my grandfather, since he and his grandmother were basically there in my life more than my parents. I agreed, so I called up my grandparents and asked them if they would be willing to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke, overcome with emotion at the thought of how much they meant to me. "You and Grandpa have always been there for me," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "You've been more than just grandparents to me, you've been like parents. And I can't imagine anyone else I'd rather have by my side on my wedding day." My grandparents didn't even hesitate before saying yes. They told me how honored they would be to walk me down the aisle, and unlike my parents, They would not disappoint me. Their words reassured me, and in that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace and contentment wash over me. With my grandparents by my side, I knew that I had a family who loved me unconditionally, and accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. I also talked to my in-laws about this, and Rob's parents assured me that they did not care if my parents didn't attend, and that regardless of their attendance, they were delighted to witness and support our union. My wedding is in 2 days, and today I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. I called him back thinking it was an emergency, and when he picked up, he asked me if it was true that my grandparents were walking me down the aisle. I told him yes, that was true, and then my dad went off about how disrespectful this was to have asked my grandparents. I reminded him how he was the one who had declined to come to my wedding, so I didn't see why he was so upset. My dad went on to yell at me about how he and mom were just trying to make me see the wrong of my ways, and that they thought that by declining the invitation, it would teach me a lesson. He went on to say how it was he and mom who had raised me and paid for my food and education, so my grandparents had no right to replace him. I tried to reason with him, explaining that my grandparents had been there for me in ways he and mom never were, but he wouldn't listen. He also told me how I had done nothing but alienate everyone from me, and this was all my fault. Since this conversation, I have been wondering if I really did something wrong here. Ida for asking my grandparents to walk me down the aisle? Update 1. Wow, I did not expect so many people would comment on my post. I have seen a lot of advice and suggestions on how I should approach this situation. I do agree that I need to cut off my parents permanently because their constant back and forth is exhausting and is starting to affect my mental health. I don't want them in my life when they have consistently shown me that Vicky is always their first priority. My parents are indeed selfish, and I have known that for a long time. However, how can a child just stop loving his/her parents? It's a much easier thing to say, but it's very difficult to actually do it. However, for my mental peace, I have no choice but to do this so I can enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. Sorry for the lack of update this past month, but I have been quite busy since my wedding. First of all, yes, my wedding went quite well, with my grandparents by my side as I walked down the aisle. Despite the absence of my parents, I felt a deep sense of joy as I exchanged vows with Rob, committing to spend the rest of our lives together. My girlfriends and I danced the night away, and I can't begin to describe how important it is to stay in touch with your childhood friends no matter what, because sometimes they are your chosen family. During the reception, I did feel a twinge of sadness at the realization that my parents were not there to share in this special moment, especially as I watched Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches to him. However, I took solace in the knowledge that I had made the right decision for myself, prioritizing my own well-being and happiness. Some of my girlfriends did give speeches, sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that had carried us through both good times and bad. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went for our honeymoon, which his parents had paid for as a wedding gift. I spent all my days just lazing around and enjoying myself with my husband. I feel so giddy every time I look at Rob and realize that he is married to me now. As I had mentioned earlier, I did cut off my parents by blocking them from everywhere. I didn't bother sending them an explanation because, very frankly, they don't even deserve one. I have no idea whether Vicky actually had a housewarming that day or it was just an excuse for my parents to not attend my wedding, but at this point, I don't care. I wish nothing but the best to them and their beloved daughter. Update 3. So I was not going to update anything further since my last update, but something just unexpected happened and I thought y'all deserve to know. I haven't checked my email in the past month because I was busy with my wedding and honeymoon, but today as I was sorting through the emails, I found an email from Vicky. I don't even know how she found out my email address, and I was completely taken aback. I hesitated over whether to open her mail or simply delete it unread, but curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked on the email. Inside was a lengthy message from Vicky, expressing her regret over our strained relationship and her desire to reconcile. She acknowledged the mistakes she had made in the past, admitting that she had been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for the pain she had caused me over the years and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. She went on to write how she feels happy for me now that I am married and that she wishes me nothing but the best. She ended the mail pleading that I should not punish my parents by cutting them off and that they missed me. Reading her words, I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, and skepticism. Part of me wants to believe that Vicky has truly changed, that she is sincere in her apology and willing to work towards repairing our relationship. But another part of me remains guarded because this seems too good to be true. However, regardless of what she has written, I know for sure my parents don't miss me, because if they had, they would not have treated me this way all these years. I thought about sending a reply back to her, but then I decided against it. After all, forgiveness isn't something to be rushed. It is a process that requires time and reflection. And while I am not sure if I am ready to forgive Vicky, I don't want to completely burn the bridge either, since she is the one who has apologized to me for her actions. To be honest, after my marriage, I no longer feel alone. I have learned to recognize that I have my loving husband by my side, supportive friends, and the unwavering love of my grandparents. And with their support, I know that I can navigate whatever challenges lay ahead, without ever needing Vicky or my parents in my life. I have also looked into it and have found a good therapist with whom I have booked my first appointment. I have taken this step so I can address and resolve any wounds from my past and heal from them.